Hello, and welcome to my channel. My name is Jonathan Cohn, and today I have my book review of the book, The Hutt Gambit, by A C Crisipin, the second novel in the Han Solo trilogy. I read about a little over a month ago the first book in the Han Solo trilogy, The Paradise Snare, and I absolutely loved this book. I absolutely loved it. It's one of the most best reading experiences for Star Wars I've read in a while. I literally read this book in one sitting. That's because I was in a car and I had literally nowhere I could go or walk around. So I read this in like 3.5 hours. It was just read through it real fast. And it was utterly delightful. And it was so much fun. And I was so excited to get into the sequel, which some people said was even better. And that is The Hutt Gambit. And so I was so excited going into The Hutt Gambit. And what I'll say with this book is, I liked it. It was entertaining, but nowhere near as good as The Paradise Snare. The pitch I'll give for this book is if The Paradise Snare is Han Solo as Indiana Jones, I'll say that The Hutt Gambit is Han Solo as James Bond, or rather, James Bond. I'll explain that in a minute. But this felt like a very different style in some ways, while still overall having the same feeling. I said this when I talked about the first book, and I'll say it again here. The Han Solo trilogy by A C Crisipin, thus far, really tonally works well with Solo, a Star Wars story. I wouldn't be surprised if one of the writers, John Kasdan on Solo, actually read the books, because they feel so tonally similar, and a lot of the themes, a lot of the characters are similar, not just with Han and Chewie, but like the love interests, just some of the way that these authors write, this author in the novels and then the writer of the movie just writes the story. It just feels very similar, and I like that. It feels like synergy of publishing. And the Hutt Gambit it still keeps that flow, but it has a different bent to it. This one has much more of a thriller-ish bent. Again, it has that kind of James Bond feeling in some ways, and it has some traditional Star Wars action. There's a big space battle at the end that's pretty big. That's pretty entertaining. But the first thing I'll start off with this book is so much more of a tell don't show book. At the beginning of the book, you're with Han and Chewie at a bar, and Han kind of recounts a little bit how he met up with Chewie, but you don't actually see that encounter. You only hear about it offhand. And so because of it, it feels weird that you're not seeing that. You also hear about Han getting thrown out of the Imperial Academy. You end book 1 with Han going to the Imperial Academy, and you start book 2 with him already being thrown out. And when I finished book 1, I was like, all right, we're going to get to see the Imperial Academy in the next book. And I was super excited. And then I picked it up and I was like, really? You don't get to see any of it? You hear them reference it. You hear people from his days in the Imperial Academy come back and talk with him here, but you don't actually see that. And that's a little frustrating, because that stuff, seeing him meet up with Chewie, seeing him at the Imperial Academy, that's the stuff I wanted to see. The stuff in here was also great, but I wanted to see that later. I wanted to see the stuff with the Academy as well. So that was a little frustrating about the book. And I think it set the book off in a little bit of a wobbly zone. And then the book focuses a lot of its story on the Hutts. And I think that when you read the first chapter, you have the implicit promise that there will be more of the overarching love story with Bria in this book. You have a glimpse of Bria in the first chapter, and they set it up. Oh, Bria's going to come back in a big way in this book. And they also set up that stuff with this guy, Terranoza, who just hates Han's living guts and just wants Han to come before him so he can punish Han and kill him. And he hates Han. And Terranoza was from the previous book. And I was so excited to see that plot line. And every time we cut over to Terranoza, I was like, okay, here we go. And then we don't see him that much. We see him glimpses here, glimpses there. Is that the right name? I feel like I'm butchering that name. Yeah, Terranosa. That's the right guy. Yeah. But anyway, I really liked his stuff, but he was barely in the book, as is Bria. Be warned, this is not Bria's book. Like, Bria's book is the first book. She's in it a lot. And then I believe we're going to get more of her in book 3. And I believe that's what A C Crisipin is setting up. But that's not what happens in this book. She's like barely in this, more than a few cameos, and it was a little bit frustrating to me, sadly. A few other positive notes about the book. I felt that the ending battle was really interesting, and there is something with an Imperial officer towards the end of the book that is downright freaky. It is scary, and it is like you feel it, and they don't even say the person's name. You just have this gut feeling of fear rush through you, and Han never sees the danger. He just hears it, and it is a brilliantly written example of how to do basically scary moments or horror. It's not true horror, but it's like how to do scary stuff in a book, and I thought it was geniusly pulled off. So that sequence was brilliant. I really liked it. I will also say that I had mixed feelings about the Hutt storyline. Some of the Hutt storyline, which was like the Hutts backstabbing each other, I was like, okay, this is interesting. And then some of that backstabbing just didn't end up being as interesting as I thought. And the missions that Han was going with the Hutts just didn't carry the book for me. And the overarching plot of the Hutts kind of going up against the Empire in a few ways was just, it was okay. But it wasn't what I wanted. You see some cool Hutts in here, including Jabba a little bit, but it mainly has a lot of this character named Jiliak the Hutt, which is just bizarre. Jiliak the Hutt is one of the most bizarre world-building elements I have ever seen in Star Wars, and it was... Oh boy, was Jiliak the Hutt weird. Jiliak was weird. I don't want to stay on that anymore. That was weird. So as you can tell, I had mixed feelings about the book. Overall, I enjoyed it, and in fact, I would still give it a very positive rating. I would still give it an 8.5 out of 10. Which you might be thinking, you talked a lot of stuff you didn't like about the book. Overall, the parts I liked about this book, I loved. The whole Terranosa subplot, the whole Han and Chewie hanging out together was great. Han meeting up with someone else in this book was great. And also, I forgot to mention, the whole James Bond thing was, part of it was because this has a more of a thriller taste to it, but also because Han has multiple women that he is basically dating throughout the book, and he just jumps from one to the next, and he feels very James Bondish, like he has a Bond girl in the books. And it feels very different from the Brea storyline, which feels much more sweeping and romantic, and feels much more like an Indiana Jones love story with Marion in the first Indiana Jones movie. This is just James Bond, average James, not Daniel Craig's last movies, but James Bond just with whatever girl is present at the movie, which is just weird. And it makes sense that Han's a scoundrel. I mean, that's kind of the backbone of his character story. But it's just weird to see that compared to what it was in the first book. You see two totally different sides of Han there. But still really entertaining, really interesting. And like just some of the sequences, there's just a few scenes in this book that are just so visually stimulating. And I'm like, that was a brilliantly executed scene. There's some great scenes in here. But there's some stuff that just didn't work. And when you compare it to book 1, I mean, to me, there's just no comparison. Book 1 was just genius through and through. And book 2 just didn't have that sparkle as much. But still, super entertaining. So I give book 2 an 8.5 out of 10. I gave book 1 like a 9.5 out of 10, near perfect. I gave book 2 like an 8.5 out of 10. Still really good, but not as good. So if you've read The Hutt Gambit by A C Crisipin, let me know your thoughts in the comments section down below. And until next time, I'm Jonathan, and thank you for watching.